Abbott Elementary is a lighthearted half-hour reprieve from all the nonsense of the world, and I love it. If you've watched the show enough, you've likely seen the read of Gregory or Janine being autistic, and not only would I say that both of them can be read as autistic, but understanding autism and watching the show through a disability lens enriches the experience of watching Abbott Elementary and adds several new layers of enjoying the show. Now, a few things. I'm both black and autistic, but I'm still only just one person. Autism affects people differently, and we have different traits that affect your lives and have different support needs as a result. I can't claim to speak for everyone, but I hope I can shine a light on why so many autistic people read Gregory and Janine as autistic. I'd also argue that Jacob is too, but the focus of this video is more on the first two. They're black, sue me.
I get that all the time. People tell me I have quite the eye for detail. I'm very good at picking up on subtle social cues.
You thought Mr. Morton had a crush on you last year.
Next, disability coding is only a form of subtext. It doesn't substitute hiring disabled people who make about a quarter of the population and are systemically excluded from these roles. Tyler James Williams, to my knowledge, is not autistic, or if he is, he's not public about it, though he does have Crohn's disease. Third, when I talk about these characters being autistic coded, I'm only referring to the fictional characters in Janine and Gregory. I'm not here to talk about the actors portraying them. It's not lost on me that the word autism doesn't show up once in Abbott about Janine or Gregory. It doesn't really need to for our purposes. Yes, there are several fictional characters explicitly stated to be autistic, or at least heavily implied enough that there's no room for other interpretation. Rick Sanchez, Wu from Extraordinary Attorney Wu, Billy Matthews, Reagan, Bibi, Billy from the Power Rangers movie, Julia, Carl, and AJ Gadgets are all a few examples. Most people against autistic headcanons usually say that the show doesn't confirm it and that they don't have a diagnosis. There are explicit portrayals of autism in media, but often they're not written to be a humanizing or engaging portrayal of autism, nor is it intended to be written to represent or connect with autistic people, but instead written for a non-disabled audience in mind. This is where a lot of ableism in how autistic characters and disabilities other than autism are depicted start to show up. A lot of villainous or antagonistic characters are presented as such, or as comedic characters ridiculed for a joke specifically because of their disability. Often disabilities, scarring, prosthetics, mobility aids, or the villain being revealed to be evil by showing they were faking their disability is used as a way to codify characters as harmful or evil, creepy, weird, the object of ridicule, or unnatural. The entire aesthetic of asylums erases the way disabled people were and still are forcibly institutionalized, abused, and killed in such spaces because of the harmful beliefs that disabled people are inherently lesser or defective. We can't really come up with a way to explain why, because no normal person acts this way according to the writer, so they're actually just disabled. Other times, disabled characters are used as sources of inspiration or shown to be sympathetic or great purely for their ability to work or contribute labor and ignore or overcome their disability through sheer force of will.
Mr. President, with all respect, sir, what you're asking can't be done.
Mr. President!
Get back, George. Get back. Do not tell me it can't be done.
It creates two problems by having people suggest that the best kinds of disabled people are the kind that don't complain about their problems, as it allows people to ignore issues of accessibility and support needs that largely go ignored. Just try harder. It also goes back to the relationship between disability and capitalism. A white supremacist capitalist power structure doesn't value people as human beings and instead reduces them purely to their ability to produce. A lot of people package their ableism in a way that doesn't directly reference disability, though many times it is that blatant, and imagine themselves as just making fun of online weirdos. Cringe culture is almost entirely built on this concept, mocking autistic and other disabled people, but using cringe behaviors as code, despite all these behaviors being commonly associated with several disabled people. As it relates to autism in media, autistic characters often run into problems and reinforce many of these same harmful narratives about autism and disability when they're explicitly named as such. This is what feeds into the autistic savant narrative, where autism or disability is only acceptable or valuable as a means of contributing or making resources for people. Often these kinds of characters are portrayed as weird or annoying with zero awareness or people skills, and everyone around them only puts up with them because they get good results. Even characters explicitly confirmed to be autistic for educational purposes, often in children's programming, like Julia from Sesame Street, Carl from Arthur, and AJ Gadgets from Hero Elementary are still written for an able-bodied audience in mind. In the case of AJ, he's black, so I'm naturally going to focus on him, his autism is explicitly described as a superpower, and the show constantly tries to sell you on the pluses that come with autism. It comes with all these caveats and sells the idea that he is a great person in spite of his autism and all the cool things that come with it, while letting you know traits that are more of a pain to him, like his negative sensory reactions. Hey, look at all the cool things he can do because of his autism. Billy Matthews, the autistic boy who beats Riley at basketball in an episode of The Boondocks, is a one-note character who runs entirely on the savant trope. You see, Tom spent the entire episode talking about how he wanted a big, inspiring sports moment with his team, referencing the Mighty Ducks, only to have that stolen from him with a walking caricature of autism, with Riley even calling him Rain Man, a film that itself is a stereotyped portrayal of autism. Billy Matthews is also based on a real autistic person, Jason McElwain, who scored 20 points in basketball and clutched a win for his team at the very end of the game. But the episode doesn't really imagine him as a person, nor does it devote enough time to him to deconstruct or satirize the ableism present in how they're framed. Instead, he's just a one-note ableist joke to further humiliate Riley, while any commentary the episode makes focuses on an entirely different topic.
Billy Matthews out of nowhere makes you wish the whole team was autistic right now, doesn't it? Don't you like to see that? Boy, that kid is special.
Describing autism as a superpower or only valuing it as a way to be talented or productive for labor reinforces the concept of imagining some disabled people as conditionally desirable, and is what paves the way for eugenics. Autism is not a superpower, it's a disability, and disability is not a dirty word.
Message!
The superpower descriptor erases the experience of autistic people who have greater support needs and also comes from an inherently damaging premise. It doesn't just make you a super genius with no social skills. AJ, and really any autistic person, should not have their worth or need conditional on their ability to contribute or do things for you. This is an issue the Proud Family reboot runs into, though kinda handles better too when it's shown that BB is autistic. In some respects, it's handled quite well, like how they specifically use language relating to support needs and center BB's needs over using a phrase like high or low functioning autism. Even then though, the episode still reveals after BB is put in the school that the children all have superpowers. The Proud Family is a mess when it comes to how it discusses most of the issues it brings up, so it doesn't surprise me. The concept of describing autistic people as having high or low functioning autism is also harmful for similar reasons, as it frames the disability purely in your ability to contribute to capitalism and asserts that you should not exist if you are not of any use.
Well, you know, Helen Keller was largely useless, but look how we remember her.
Likewise, the word spectrum doesn't mean that you're more or less autistic, but rather it describes a spectrum of traits common to the autistic experience, like sensory reactions to light, noise, foods, or other things. Support needs between two autistic people can differ a great deal and can fluctuate, but that doesn't make one more autistic. Centering an able-bodied audience also commonly gets shown in the way that people who befriend or enter relationships with disabled people are portrayed as virtuous or amazing for daring to put up with them. Likewise, the reverse can happen, where able-bodied friends and family are presented as positive or even sympathetic for hating the disabled character or even abusing or killing them. Bonnie from Family Guy gradually transitioned into the bitter family trope. She's not presented as sympathetic per se, but she is used for comedy. At the beginning of the series, she was mostly there for a joke about how she's always pregnant, but later morphed into being resentful and bitter toward Joe for him being disabled.
I'll take it.
One of the simplest reasons for these issues is that a lot of people, including writers, are ableist. disability justice or studies isn't something a lot of people go out of their way to learn about, and accidentally good autism representation happens most of the time when the creator doesn't even realize they're making a disabled character. When they do seek out to make a disabled character, they often hire consultants from autism organizations, often harmful ones, instead of seeking disabled people affected by it. Hell, even having an autistic person in the writing room doesn't necessarily solve the problem because lateral ableism still exists. Julia from Sesame Street is particularly egregious because Sesame Street has a partnership with Autism Speaks. Plenty of other people have made detailed articles and analyses about why Autism Speaks is a harmful organization. I can't possibly cover it all in a timely way. But in short, Autism Speaks is an organization operating from the assumption that autism is a disease that needs to be corrected or the people removed or cured of it. It's an organization that advocates for eugenics. If you see puzzle piece imagery being criticized by autistic people, it's because that's the symbol associated with Autism Speaks. Arthur had a much more engaging episode with dyslexia and, while not directly named, dysgraphia, and focuses on George's fear of stigmatization because he has trouble reading and doesn't yet have the language to realize he even is disabled. Look, I don't know who managed to work in a Shaft reference in an episode about disabilities, but thank you.
Hammer.
To be valued as a disabled person, they want you to look pitiable enough that you can be weaponized by others, but not so pitiable you're unable to work and thus better off dead. As a result, disabled people are often imagined as manipulative tricksters trying to lie and deceive everyone into giving them sympathy and resources. When you act in service of white supremacy though, people are all too happy to validate disability to infantilize people and picture themselves as having no control over their actions. When Elon Musk, Donald Trump, Kanye West, Chris Rock, whoever does or says some awful bigoted thing, out come the social media critics saying actually it's ableist to hold these people accountable when it's no such thing. Adding in other layers like race, age, gender, sexuality, or other disabilities separate from autism drastically alters your life experience. People of marginalized genders, particularly when they're black, are underreported in diagnoses because of the gendered assumptions about them. It's not that autism is a disability for cishet white boys, it's that that's the demographic assumed to be the default in medical research. There's also an additional layer for black and other non-white autistic people who experience racism and white autistic people who weaponize their autism to shield themselves from criticism by saying they have no control over their racist behavior or can't read social cues. To be disabled, or to be labeled as such, is to constantly be infantilized, scrutinized, adultified, pitied, and placed into a specific narrative or framework based on whatever suits your oppressor best. And even autistic people who hold power with privileged identities can weaponize this very thing for themselves. All of this is to say is that there are many explicit autism portrayals in media, and not all of them are entirely harmful and have other positive things going for them. But many of them come with harmful strings attached because there's an insidious reason for that inclusion, or they're written carelessly without taking into consideration how these real-world narratives are used. What really separates harmful portrayals from better ones, not that they're a binary of good or bad, is that it's not just a matter of Googling traits, making a checklist, and declaring a character autistic. What often comes with it is what kind of narrative or commentary the story creates with how autism affects their lives. Autism portrayals in media have a phenomenon where many nuanced and well-liked portrayals of autism tend to happen accidentally with no intention of even writing an autistic character, while the ones that outright name characters as autistic and seek out to portray us come with a lot of harmful problems and harmful implications. We call such characters autistic coded in that they have several traits or episodes or narratives that relate to autism despite the character never explicitly confirmed to be such. Sinclair from Living Single, SpongeBob SquarePants, Huey and Webby from the DuckTales reboot, Fred Jones from Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, Lilo from Lilo and Stitch, Hank Hill from King of the Hill, Tina from Bob's Burgers, Donatello from Rise of the TMNT, Abed from Community, Bruno from Encanto, Ice Bear from We Bare Bears, and Tulip from Infinity Train are all a few examples of characters commonly read as autistic. Some of these may have been designed with it in mind, or the creators said that they could be read as such on Twitter, but they were never explicitly stated in the show's text. It can also happen unintentionally at first, viewers pick up on it and the creator notices this and actively leans into it. Reading characters as autistic or disabled isn't done just to project onto a character for the hell of it, though that's also fine. Oftentimes, reading a character as autistic can enrich the story or create new layers of storytelling the plot didn't previously offer, something I feel happens big time with Abbott Elementary. That's what brings us to autism in the context of Abbott Elementary, even though they don't use the word autistic.
I just don't understand the concept of having a bunch of ingredients just slosh around in your mouth.
First, I'd like to give a big fuck you to Republican politician Greg Abbott, not just for your horrendous political stances, but also because you made researching this portion of the video extremely annoying. Most autism reads of Gregory point to the episode where he reveals he hates pizza specifically because of the texture and sticks to a few foods he likes.
It's not just pizza. I've got like 4 or 5 things that I actually like, and I just stick to those.
Do you like pie?
Fruit should not be hot.
Okay.
You can tell, for just a second, Jacob thought about committing a hate crime here. Autistic people can have positive or negative sensory reactions to food, sounds, or even clothes. Things like hoodies and noise-canceling headphones are commonly associated with autism because they represent ways to help regulate sensory reactions around us. Liking or disliking certain foods because of the sensory reactions you get from them is a common experience too. After they react to him not liking foods, they recognize that what they did was hurtful and make up for it. The show doesn't try to frame Gregory as wrong for his food and sensory issues, as they all share weird things about themselves. It arrives at the conclusion that they're all weirdos and make it up to Gregory. They saw he no longer ate in the lunchroom and went out of their way to make him feel welcome again because there was never anything about him that needed changing. Yes, they use the word weird to describe it, but the fact that they also describe themselves as weird is what helps it be inclusive. They don't dance around the fact that the detail stands out. It does. But what makes it work is that they say, yeah, so? He's not hurting anyone, so we shouldn't make him feel excluded for something that works for him. Another episode is everything Gregory did with this detailed-ass plan with all of his lessons mapped out. He even counted on things going wrong, but the poor man just crashes and burns when Barbara lists a few things he hadn't accounted for. In season 2, Gregory ends up getting pushback from people because he vocalizes that Gritty doesn't make sense to him and he doesn't understand the association of the mascot to the sport. The same episode has one of Gregory's most direct moments where Jacob notices Janine has a threat of eviction on the horizon and notifies Gregory, who bluntly shouts in the hallway asking if she's getting evicted. Never change, dude. In the episode Fundraiser, Janine asks a rhetorical question of, guess who I ran into, and Gregory answers very directly, going down the line of everyone he can think of. Gregory's form of expressing care and love toward others displays itself quite well with his gardening. He shows a form of care and concerns for others through his actions. He says he hates gardening because of the time with his father, but he can't bring himself to ignore the garden failing, and so he secretly tends to it. He doesn't do this because he thinks he's superior to them. He doesn't credit himself for the work all this time. He doesn't even do it because he likes it, but his actions are his love language. He almost strikes me as having alexithymia or low empathy, a frequently misunderstood trait that some autistic people have. A lot of autistic people find delays in discovering they're autistic because of the stereotyping and misconceptions surrounding low empathy. I personally had this experience not realizing that I have low empathy. Alexithymia also is not exclusive to just autistic people, but the important thing to take away is that more empathy doesn't necessarily equate to more good. It's also important not to alienate autistic people who don't always accurately assess emotions or those with low empathy, because they are not less than, nor does this mean that they're callous, heartless assholes. When pressed about this, he answers honestly, and while he answers very directly and bluntly, it's not done maliciously. This isn't Gregory thinking they can't do anything and he needs to save them because everyone around him is beneath them. He's doing this because he has skills he knows he can use to help them succeed. Reading Gregory as autistic also adds a new layer of complexity in understanding the relationship with his father, who incorporates the concept of masking. Masking is mimicking behaviors deemed socially acceptable while avoiding harmless but socially unacceptable behavior like stimming. Stimming is not something just autistic people do. Everyone, autistic or not, stims in some way. But it's brought up a lot in the context of autism because it acts as a means of emotional regulation, stress management, or often just happens without you even realizing it because emotions just happen. Things like playing with your hair, bouncing, shaking your hands or legs, or singing in the car can all be examples of stimming. Those cringe videos you see of people posting their children's meltdowns or angry, seemingly overreacting adults are often autistic people being emotionally prodded and then recorded for entertainment. A lot of times we label harmless behaviors as weird or cringy or assign meaning to otherwise neutral actions or expressions. This in turn also makes it difficult to identify autism because autistic people who don't know it yet associate their masking behavior as standard. Oh, I don't really stim for stress relief, so I don't think I'm autistic. Do you really not stim? Or do you get weird looks when you stim and only find yourself stimming in private and immediately snap back to masking when you're around others? Unfortunately, a lot of autism is dealing with an expectation that you mask and hide everything deemed socially unacceptable, even a great emotional toil to yourself. Gregory gives us a great amount of insight into having masking behavior imposed on him and now being able to step out of that. Gregory grew up with a strict, controlling military dad. As a result, most of his behaviors associated with his body language and eye contact are all learned behaviors imposed onto him by his father. In the episode Fight, we see this explored more as Gregory starts to experience black boy joy and tries to force himself to hide his happiness from the change in relationship with his father. The episode Fundraiser also has this scene.
Surprising no one, I do not like donuts, so for that reason, I will decline your offer. I actually love donuts.
The episode Principal Office directly alludes to this. Gregory has a disruptive student, and Greg is right to recognize it as an issue, but per Jacob's advice, though, he sends him to the principal's office. But his solution relies on fear and shame, something he notes was done to him as a child. This kid loves Bluey and seems to have an interest with how much they bring it up, and honestly it wouldn't surprise me if you told me this kid was autistic. Hell, Bluey itself has a lot of autistic viewers. Greg believes that a principal should be a frightening authority figure to children and believes it good for their development, but comes around by the end recognizing that the way he was treated was traumatizing and unhealthy. Barbara also brings up the gendered aspect of this issue with him being a black man. He's one of the few, possibly only black male teachers some of these kids will have, and that plays a big role in their development. The last scene of Gregory is him getting a call from his dad, his posture relaxed, then snapping back and masking his behavior to meet his father's expectations.
What up, Pop? Yeah, of course. Of course. I'm sorry, Lieutenant Colonel Father, sir.
The recurring element we see is that Gregory has been conditioned since childhood to treat things like moving, shaking, improper eye contact, and posture as unacceptable, and he has to force himself to deviate from that. Another recurring element with Greg being read as autistic is his organization and communication style. In the episode Wish List, Gregory remarks that his room looks clean and that he likes clean. The whole exchange between him and Janine are where the two have different organization styles. Yes, it's in part due to the fact that by this point Greg is a substitute and only going to be there temporarily, but he still specifically points out that he likes the clean, organized look of the room. At the end of the episode, Janine apologizes for inserting herself in how to decorate his room, not catching why he felt the way that he did, but also correctly pointing out that the kids like him and have a connection with him that he didn't notice. It's not that Janine can't do anything right, it's more that Janine has a correct idea, even if sometimes there are communication gaps and oversteps in how to deliver on that. Even the portion of their ability to interpret the drawings from the kids adds to this read for me. Gregory and Janine have opposite experiences with the gifted program when they were kids and felt less than and supported by it respectively. Janine is the other side of the coin, and it's pretty much a meme now about how many autistic kids end up being the ones picked for these programs. Janine even notices in talking about the program the implications of the hierarchical nature of it.
There's nothing wrong with the gifted program itself. We just need to organize it better so that the regular kids, the ungifted kids,
It then invites more questions. Are those children not excelling really not gifted? What does gifted even mean? Perhaps they have disabilities they're not aware of, and as Gregory points out, there are multiple ways to be gifted. The big takeaway from this episode is, what is intelligence other than an arbitrary system of measurement and a means of establishing a hierarchy over others? And if you have any knowledge on the history of what intelligence is and how it's less of an actual thing and more a way to institutionalize people or rationalize systemic abuse toward disabled and other oppressed people, then yeah. Janine did identify a genuine problem in the students having different needs and learning at different paces, but by the end of the episode, in part thanks to Gregory, she recognizes the harmful implications of her first solution. In episode 8, Greg runs into an issue preparing kids for an upcoming test. He does the direct approach of memorization and views their questions as extraneous and pointless. He's not portrayed as bad or wrong for his learning style, but is encouraged to roll with their questions and recognize that to them, they're not necessarily joking, but are trying to get details that he might not consider. Barbara suggests using song and dance and more energetic movements, not because, oh, Gregory needs to be less robotic and needs to be a normal person, but because she realizes some kids have different learning styles. It's about using different communication and learning styles, not seeing one as wrong. A lot of Gregory's subplots focus around learning different communication styles. He's very direct, sets boundaries with people, and stands by them, but the show doesn't portray him as a bad person for that. Even without his dad's influence, Gregory is still just a very organized, very direct person. A lot of Tyler's acting, particularly from his body language, eye contact, and his way of making Gregory's speech somewhat stilted at times, all contributes to that. When Gregory speaks, he speaks very tersely and directly, though not maliciously. A lot of times, speaking with a neutral, direct tone is read as being angry or aggressive, which causes people to misread your emotions. This is especially common when you're black and autistic, because black people are assumed to be angry and aggressive by default and have aggression projected onto us when we speak up, and being autistic further magnifies that. If you're emotional, you're seen as violent and dangerous, but if you're neutral and direct, you're seen as angry, intimidating, and aggressive. The angry black woman trope, for instance, exists for a reason, and it serves two purposes. One is that it's used to weaponize racial violence against black women by portraying them as overly emotional and irrational. But also harmful is the way that it robs black women of their humanity, because when they actually are angry, they're right to be angry. Anger is as real as any other human emotion, and when you see something so completely disgusting and unacceptable, which is pretty much every day if you're a black woman following any current events, projecting anger onto people to invalidate what they're saying also robs them of the space to show that sometimes you should be angry about things. Projecting anger and aggression onto black people gets us killed. And it happens constantly in the workplace, interpersonally, on social media, and out in public. It's already known that police disproportionately target black people, but within that number are black disabled people who are targeted at even higher rates. This is why it's critical to understand that the liberation of black people has to encompass unique harms when intersecting race, age, gender, sexuality, disability, and so on. Gregory routinely sets harmless boundaries with people that are misinterpreted to be intimidating or hateful for enforcing his boundaries from viewers reacting to the show. This isn't jerk behavior, this is respect my boundaries. He values direct communication. This usually happens, in my experience, with white Jacob fans who like him and see Gregory as an overly cynical jerk or grump who hates everyone around him. One thing I appreciate about Abbott's writing is how it respects Gregory's space to set boundaries while also challenging him on ways he can communicate with people differently or more effectively. Gregory reads very much as a late-diagnosed black autistic man who, because of his upbringing, masked his behavior most of his life without realizing it. He is now beginning to experience life without the mask. He still sets boundaries and upholds those, keeps to his interests, and isn't hurting anyone by holding to those, but he still keeps learning and is willing to be challenged on communication styles, not because his are wrong, but because there's value as an educator in having multiple available.
I'm Janine. I like responsibility and structure and weighted blankets. The 3 pillars.
Janine can also be read as autistic, and I think a lot more people see her as that, even if they don't realize it, based on the very telling reaction from a sizable portion of viewer reactions. While Gregory reads as an autistic black man who masked his behavior his entire life due to his father, Janine reads as a black woman who does not mask and doesn't have language for why she's met with so much isolation and hostility in her life. One point is in the way Janine dresses herself. After rewatching, it's easy to notice that Janine's power clashing, as she puts it, is really just her dressing in a way that's functional and practical to her, but others take as a weird way of dressing. Nearly every single episode will have at least one remark from someone, usually but not always Ava, questioning or outright insulting her clothes. In particular, the episode Egg Drop points out that she wears Velcro shoes and that she had trouble tying her shoes, which is something that affects some autistic people. If you ever wonder why kids get made fun of for Velcro shoes, it's because they're accessible and provide a simple solution for a lot of disabled people who can't always tie their shoes. There's no harm or real difference to them, even if you didn't know how to tie your shoes, like who cares? You're not hurting anyone and it doesn't merit hostility, but the proximity or association with disability is enough to draw hostility. By the way, Mr. Morton zeroes in on this exact thing by insulting her Velcro shoes in the same episode. Clothes and the way you dress are valuable to autistic people because you often have sensory reactions to your environment. So the clothes you wear all day, particularly in workplaces that often have dress codes, are important to you. Things like how tight your shoes are, the texture or fit of clothes, and the material itself all play into positive or negative sensory reactions we get to our clothes. These sensory reactions to food, clothes, or an environment are things that get autistic people labeled as picky eaters, bad dressers, or cringy and weird for finding harmless solutions that meet our needs. In episode 7, we're told that Janine wears orthopedics, dresses in a way that other characters think is weird but is functional for her, and eats foods that work for her that others find weird. Episode 4 gives us the line about Janine's overall presence and how Janine can have issues with volume control and space boundary. In the Step episode, Janine specifically points out that she likes Step for the structure and stability, particularly that she didn't get at home, and it's heavily shown that Janine wanted to build community with these girls. The fact that Ava jokes about responsibility, structured, and weighted blankets just feels so specific. Weighted blankets are commonly associated with autistic people because the weight provides a positive pressure stim that helps with stress relief and sometimes better sleep, which is a common issue with autistic people. Janine also happy and nervous stims so much. My personal favorite Janine stimming moment is in the episode Holiday Hookah, where she's with her friend and bouncing from excitement, which causes Betty and Veronica to hit the dance floor before she gets a chance to. One thing that causes problem for Janine and many other autistic people are implied or misleading rules or instructions. In the first episode, Ava instructs everyone to email her about their resource needs. Now in this context, she doesn't actually mean what she said. Barbara correctly connects that she had no plans on following through on her word, but Janine is someone who thrives on direct communication. She doesn't just say what she needs, but goes into great detail in the email as to why it's needed. Ava then passive-aggressively insults her, and it's in part a commentary on experienced versus new teachers, but the specific ways Janine reacts to instructions and is the only one to directly call Ava out on this comes to mind. She specifically calls attention to Ava's inconsistent instructions as well.
We need something more immediate.
Oh, no, the rugs are immediate. They're like instant Xanax for kids. I explained it all in my email.
Girl, who told you to send an email?
You did.
Anyway.
You could argue that, oh, that's because she's new, it's not really an autism thing. Except Janine continues to put faith in Ava even when Ava has given her no real reason to trust her, like in the Step Show episode. Of course, that episode did establish that Ava isn't just a one-dimensional jerk, and I want to make this clear right now, I love Ava for the most part, particularly the adjustments they made with her in Season 2 where she still provides for the students, and albeit in an underhanded, unofficial way. But in watching the show, she routinely zeroes in on, quote, cringe behaviors she dislikes about Janine. She also sexually harassed Gregory a lot in Season 1, which I'm glad they stepped away from because I felt it was one of the worst parts of the show. This episode demonstrates the trade-offs of high empathy, as Janine decides to believe Ava despite having no real reason to. Yes, Ava had a legitimate reason to drop everything because she has a family emergency, but the fact still remains that Ava continually insulted and belittled Janine here, something everyone around Janine brought up. Ava very much reads as a neurotypical person who zeroes in on Janine as autistic and begins insulting her for it, because she does it in nearly every episode, and the things she hones in on, like Janine's social skills, ability to interpret social cues and body language, and way of dressing are all things real autistic people get scrutinized for unless they mask their behavior. A lot of people will probably say they wouldn't mock a disabled person, but the practice is quite normalized through what behaviors are labeled as cringy. Now yes, Janine does overstep and do things that merit criticism, we'll get to those in a bit, but there are several instances in the show where people are just needlessly hostile to her for no other reason than they don't like that something about her. That something is autism. Also, the episode Fight reveals that Janine's mother and sister fought a lot, which represents a lot of sensory overload she couldn't tolerate, which then manifests in how she handles the two fighting girls in her class. And a lot of people with high empathy end up having a problem because they react strongly to other people's strong emotions. Janine has a habit of overstepping and inserting herself in things, but while she does this, she almost always comes from a place of genuinely wanting to help or support someone. Janine will often act without thinking because she projects her own understanding of relationships with her family because she has little to no frame of reference to draw from. The resolution of these conflicts is almost always to understand a communication gap between two characters and they meet her halfway. She makes a food dish as a sister trap for the woman from the Parent Trap because Janine projected her own relationship with her sister onto Melissa. She felt that Melissa's reason for not talking to her sister was extremely petty and frivolous, not realizing that the potatoes being made wrong were not the root issue, and not having help when providing care for her family was. Janine also misses several implied social cues to drop it that Melissa left but doesn't explicitly say.
Getting the hint. Go ahead, finish.
Okay. Anyway.
Even in her apology, Janine explicitly recognizes that she can be prone to over-explaining and consciously verbalizes not wanting to do it.
I don't want to undercut my apology by over-explaining my behavior.
Sure you don't.
A lot of autistic people go into a pattern of transparently explaining things like this, which to non-autistic people comes across as over-explaining, something that Janine does multiple times. In interacting with a lot of non-autistic people, it's this nasty cycle where it feels like the more clear and transparent you try to be, the more hostile and suspect people get, and it creates this nasty, frustrating paradox a lot of autistic people deal with. Janine keeps it short here because her priority was doing the right thing for Melissa after she overstepped here. The show also makes it clear numerous times that Janine is someone who hates conflict and fighting, like when she describes how she hates the arguing between her sister and mother, to the point where she just tries to get the two students she has to get along. Janine continually constructs the idea of having a close relationship with others, particularly Barbara, and comes up with scenarios that imagine a specific kind of closeness with the two as together as mentor and mentee. Her characterization makes it clear that through most of her life she's had numerous communication gaps and breakdowns in trying to make friends. The few she's made are usually results of other people, and now that they're gone from her life, she's having to branch out of her comfort zone. It's important to recognize that Janine is also a black woman, one who's been taken advantage of by multiple people in her life and not given proper love or reciprocation. As a result, she is a major people pleaser who neglects her own health and needs. In episode 2, the episode centers around Janine having her needs and words ignored by her boyfriend who leeches off of her, and even after this we see he takes advantage of her labor. Janine tries to fix the lights, but it's after her boyfriend ignores her needs, which she says deserve to be met. This isn't happening because Janine thinks she can do everything and she thinks she knows better than everyone around her. This is her venting her frustration with her boyfriend not pulling his weight or following through on things, and she wants some sense of control. It causes hurt to the others and she neglects her own needs. She goes about it in an unhealthy way and passes out because she gave him her food, and in doing so neglects her health. And the show frames this as a harmful thing she needs to get away from. In episode 5, Janine takes Ava's dismissive sarcasm literally and jumps on the idea of the student liking her more. She takes a critical review harshly. The miscommunication between Janine and Melissa came from Melissa joking but not recognizing how it affected Janine, who had been in a state of hurt. So Janine responds in a way as if she had been deliberately slighted. There was a communication breakdown, but Janine acted based on an incorrect assumption instead of vocalizing her needs, which she's used to having neglected. Janine info dumps on multiple occasions, explains things thoroughly in a way that to non-autistic people reads as over-explaining. She prepares detailed, elaborate presentations and plans for pretty much everything. She spends all night working on a project and puts together detailed events and presentations to engineer the specific outcomes she wants. The strong sense of wanting control over things she simply can't control, particularly as it ties to relationships, is just... been there. In the episode Work Family, Janine gets uncomfortable at the thought of not having the same understanding of her relationship with her colleagues the way they do when Jacob calls them work friends. She comes up with a bonding exercise to act on this idea because she didn't feel their relationship was the same as they saw it. This comes up again in the Halloween episode, where she pushes herself out of her comfort zone and seeing that Tariq was a source of a lot of her connections, and she wants to have friends outside of her workplace. She has this friend from college who she used to roll with because she didn't have anyone better, not because she was a good match for her. Janine stands up to her and then makes it up to Melissa because Janine never really overstepped or did anything awful in this episode, but she rightfully calls this woman out for doing Melissa dirty with the children's books. This comes up again in the episode Juice. The lunch food is decided on by the staff. The explicit rule is that all are welcome, but there's an unspoken, implied rule that the lunch staff will be making the decisions. Janine jumps in and gives input while the rest of them don't really care.
You don't need to stand when you talk.
You don't need to talk, period.
Once a year, the lunch crew has a meeting to discuss new menu options from the school district. This year was about juice. Now, the meeting is technically open to all staff, but most teachers take the hint and leave it to the professionals. One teacher wouldn't know a hint if it closed the door in the face.
This is one of the episodes that gets Janine a lot of flack, but she didn't just pull this information out her ass. She researched and prepared her reasoning as to why the juice selection would be better. Even just her reading an entire year's worth of documentation and preparation supports the autism reading. She and Barbara both have friction over this, and frankly both of them have their share of problems here, like Janine boasting for no reason, and Barbara's I told you so adage of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, when quite possibly the most contrived outcome with the bathroom happens. She seems to take more issue with Janine's enthusiasm at something she didn't care about, which sure, you have finite energy and spend it where it counts. But the idea that Janine broke everything over the most contrived scenario was ridiculous. The real harm Janine causes in this episode isn't even the juice policy that seems to draw her the most ire. It's the way that Janine and Gregory violate Barbara's boundary of using her class's bathroom. She wasn't just doing that for the hell of it. She has a student who uses a wheelchair and was advocating on his behalf because it represents an accessibility need for him, and Barbara can't afford to have something go wrong with that bathroom. Janine was not owed an explanation here, nor should she have ignored Barbara's word because another student's accessibility needs were not her business. It was her ignoring Barbara's boundary and not the contrived juice scenario or her personality or enthusiasm that caused any of this. It also takes for granted the ways that the school board had the means to address the problem sooner, but didn't because of an arbitrary distinction of what an emergency qualifies as. So you're telling me that Janine is a black woman who likes structure and stability, dresses for comfort and practicality, loves weighted blankets, stims when she's happy or nervous, has volume control issues, info dumps on several occasions, is routinely labeled a bit much because she's enthusiastic, has communication gaps and needs clear instructions, and her entire characterization is her breaking away from an unhealthy pattern of people-pleasing and instead prioritizing her own needs and comfort? You don't say. This is why, especially for a black woman, I love that the focus with Janine is her going out of her comfort zone and doing things on her terms because Janine is who matters. I'll be real, I hate slow burns and I hate will they won't they, but when Greg warned her not to get with Maurice and she calls him out asking why he's friends with Maurice if he's the kind of person he needs to warn her about, I love that for her. Go on, sis. She didn't even realize yet what an ass this dude was to the kids, but I do love this ending where she's not sacrificing her comfort or wants to please others. She wanted the ribs, so she got the ribs. Dating and acting in a very performative, scripted behavior is just one of those that's the way it is kind of things. Maurice went through scripted behavior himself when he swears at a kid and dismisses him only to use that same kid as a prop when Janine is watching, and so he can perform for her even though he doesn't like kids. When we get to see stories and characterizations about black women not being walked over and getting to set terms for themselves, I can't help but get that black joy. I don't even need her to get with Gregory. I'm glad they're focusing on the portion of her focusing on her needs and boundaries, which is a central part of her breakup. Janine just reads to me as a black autistic woman who, because of her autism, has been met with hostility a great deal of her life, which then further limits how many social interactions she's had. She needs clear and direct instructions and boundaries on things, and is also currently working on breaking away from her unhealthy people-pleasing and prioritizing her needs first. So yeah, I don't love will they won't they, but I do love what they're doing here. Having a black autism couple in the moments of awkwardness and them trying to navigate how to be together when they're just vibing is really sweet. I have a few issues with it, like I said, the will they won't they, the fact that Greg has a girlfriend and the like, but the most important thing to me is that I'm glad they're focused on the most important thing, which is Janine's personal growth and needs being met. And that's way more important than what man, if any, she ends up with. Others can recognize when she pulls a Janine, but the reason others like Barbara and Melissa still appreciate her is because Janine correctly identifies numerous problems and genuinely tries to address them. The conflict of most episodes is about projection and miscommunication, and is usually resolved by people meeting halfway instead of saying, Janine just doesn't get it and needs to be more normal. That's not to say she's flawless or above criticism, but they work out their differences and properly call her out when she acts in an unhealthy or harmful way. I wonder how Janine is viewed by a sizable portion of the fandom. I I hate that I'm even saying this, but the biggest way I identify with reading Janine as autistic is in the amount of hate she gets from how many viewers specifically hone in on her lack of social cues, her body language, her personality, that they all find incredibly annoying. Because these are the exact ways people talk about real-life autistic people when we unmask for even a second. Gregory doesn't get the same amount of pushback or hate that Jacob and Janine get, but it's also important to note that his entire character centers around an autistic black man made to mask regularly. There's a reason he was so hesitant to share that he didn't like pizza. Janine gets the load of the pushback he largely doesn't because she's a woman who does not mask. I'm not saying that anyone who dislikes Janine is ableist or that there aren't valid criticisms to the show's writing or her character. I'm only pointing out that the criticisms almost always tie to how they find Janine burdensome for her inability to grasp social cues or take hints, when the plot directly focuses on the harms communication gaps can cause, which is an especially strong point for Black autistic women. Obviously, Janine is a fictional character, but I find that she's likely unintentionally written as a Black autistic woman who doesn't mask her behavior and gets met with the same reaction as if she were a real autistic Black woman, because the responses mirror the ways Black autistic people are talked to and about so much. The way people are calling her the villain, the worst, super annoying, the worst TV character, or say that they love everyone in the show but her. And then when asked why, they start to list off a bunch of traits commonly associated with autistic people is really something. When we're not that hyper-competent savant or the comforting masked autistic person, we get this. I love Janine, fight me. I love her attitude and growth, and I can't wait to see more of where they go with it. So, why all this talking about a headcanon, right? Well, disability is an important topic, and I want people to know more about it and how ableism affects people's lives. One of the more recent episodes, Readathon, had a really great scene at the end where Melissa holds a conference with this girl's parents about their daughter's reading. She seems to be generating a lot of pages for the Readathon, but isn't retaining the information, which prompts Melissa to think she might struggle with reading. She raises the possibility to the girl's parents that she might have trouble reading and even tries suggesting helpful resources and points out how it can cause a lot of problems down the line. But the angered reaction that she even implies this about their daughters is ableism. They're deeply offended at the mere suggestion that their daughter might need help and storm away without listening. She could have a learning disability, maybe not. It doesn't really matter either way, because merely alluding to disability was enough to make them think something could be wrong with her, as if disability means she's broken and wrong, and they deny her help that would benefit her either way. That's the thing. Accessibility resources benefit everyone, disabled or not. Closed captioning is a great example. Melissa herself also has reading trouble, so she endured an entire layer of hurt herself and still went out of her way to provide this girl with the resources because her parents wouldn't listen. And I love that. This episode never explicitly names an exact disability, and it doesn't need to. There could even not be one. This is disability advocacy right here. Recognizing a need and raising people up on resources to help them. Abbott Elementary constantly has the theme of recognizing that the stigma of looking weird to people doesn't really go away. But if someone's not hurting you, and they're enjoying themselves or are better off for what they're doing, who the hell cares? Whether it's Jacob having a corny samurai skit, or Ava teaching poor kids how to properly lie to make extra money and to get by, and providing them with resources herself, or Janine deciding to dismantle a hierarchical, gifted program to provide something for everyone, the theme rings true throughout. Anytime you point out that the latest thing labeled cringe, or annoying, or chronically online are overwhelmingly traits associated with disabled people, out come the people saying, well, I wasn't talking about you, and that's kind of the problem, because disabled people are so rarely considered in most circumstances. Black autistic people are abused and killed at higher rates specifically due to how people perceive and manipulate us because of our autism. Whether it's social expectations in school, in workplaces, from our families, when you read about police violence toward Black people, know that Black disabled people are targeted for violence and abuse at even higher rates. We're also diagnosed at far lower rates due to the healthcare industry we engage with being inaccessible for most of us and wildly bigoted for the few of us that can access it. Chadwick Boseman was treated this way when people were mocking him for his thinner appearance, making all sorts of memes. But then he showed that he had cancer, and suddenly they were sympathetic. Disabled people don't owe you a specific performance of their disability to be treated with respect. Tyler Williams noted that he almost died from Crohn's disease, which he wasn't even aware that he had. Now, do I think that Janine and Gregory are canon, deliberate attempts at disability rep by the production crew? No, not at all. In fact, they're probably better because they didn't seek to include them. So next time you post about how you find someone the most overbearing or annoying, take a second to interrogate your thoughts.